Mr. Gratton.
Canada arguably possesses one of the world's most abundant chests of resources, yet we seem to fall behind from many countries when it comes to our mining operation. To your experience, why is this the case?
So, I'll give you a history lesson. I think successive provincial and federal governments spent the last several decades taking our sector for granted and forgetting just how essential we are to this country. It's in the last 5 years that everyone has woken up. Governments of all stripes across the country have woken up and said, oh, what just happened here? We need more mining. And that's welcome. That's where I sort of say that I think it's mining's moment. I think not just Canada, but the world has woken up to the fact that we actually need the things that make the things that we rely on for our daily lives. I do think mining has been such a central industry for this country for so long that it's not to necessarily be critical. I can see how maybe governments took us for granted. We were very big and we kept growing and then we started to slow down and people weren't really noticing. But now we are, and I think things are starting to turn around. We just have to look at the gold sector, which has gone from 5th to 4th spot overall worldwide in the last few years. We've increased our production of gold at a time when it's a really good time to be producing gold by 31%. And we've got more mines coming on stream. So our production is going to increase this year and next. We can do the same for copper. We can do the same for nickel. We can do the same for all of the critical minerals that we need with the same focus and discipline. Gold has had the advantage of having prices that have attracted a lot of exploration and development. With the right tax incentives, like my colleague just mentioned, for development costs underground, we can increase our production of nickel and other critical minerals in the very short to medium term. So we can do this. We just need to now turn our attention to what's required.
Thank you. Monsieur Gaulin, you're an international company. What has your company's experience been with the mining approval process in Canada compared to other jurisdictions you operate in?
As mentioned, we are a mature miner in Canada. I think we've recently brought on the Voisey's Bay underground expansion to our surface mining there, but many of our mines are deep underground and have been for quite some time. The mining approval process in other jurisdictions can sometimes move faster, but not always with the same degree of certainty that when you get your permit, that you will actually get to build. So we do operate in other jurisdictions such as Brazil and Indonesia, where you may be promised your permit in time, but then your ability to build, to have access to the infrastructure and to get to market may be questioned. I think what we're seeing around the world, certainly in Canada, but it's a contagion around the world, is to accelerate mine permitting responsibly around the world. The EU has done that. The United States is doing that at rapid pace, and that is something that we should keep our minds and our attention on, because just as 10 years ago, the United States was the #1 customer for oil and gas for Canada, it became our #1 competitor. Mining faces the same existential threat from the United States. So I would applaud any motions that accelerate mine permitting in Canada, because we are going to need more minerals for all of the above. But that is something that shouldn't be restricted just a few projects. That should be for all responsible projects.
It's time for
Can I just add something here? May I?
Yes.
There's a saying in the industry that I heard a long time ago that is worth mentioning here. Canada is often said within our sector is to be one of the best places to operate a mine, one of the worst places to develop it. And we need to change the second part And I think there are steps that we're seeing across the country to do just that. We don't have to become the best or the fastest in the world because we've already got that first one down, as Jeff mentioned. But we have to get better at that second half of the equation.
Thank you, Mr. Breton. So we're going to go on to Mr. Hogan for 5 minutes and then Monsieur Simard for 2.5.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. I want to talk about the overall market environment for critical minerals, because I think we can all absolutely agree there's a place for robust industrial policy, smart interventions by Canada and the provinces. But of course, we also want a free market with supply and demand and price signals. And so there's a couple of problems that come to mind for me. The first problem is domestically. Mr. Dunn, you identified unequal treatment of critical minerals. And, second, I think we have an international challenge, and that's really two. First, it's a race, as you mentioned, Mr. Gaulin. And second, and it's been touched by many witnesses, not every nation wants a free market. And so there are interventions in that otherwise operating free market. So I'll get to that if that time allows. But Mr. Dunn, I was pretty compelled on first exposure that helium should be treated like other critical minerals from a flow-through and ITC perspective. I wanted to maybe give you the chance to elaborate on that and inform the committee on if there were other areas where treatment was uneven, or if there's areas we should take extra care to make sure we're not distorting the market and creating other unevenness throughout.
Oh, thank you, MP Hogan. Well, definitely the uncompetitive tax treatment that helium receives is a real problem. Not having access to the standard tools is certainly Canada recognizes that depreciation is a big deal in terms of attracting investment. And you can see this through Canada's accelerated investment initiative that focuses on competitive depreciation rates. As well, flow-through shares are responsible for 70% of financing for nascent exploration. So these are key tools that Canada has in its economic toolbox that currently helium doesn't have access to. So with that, it could go further, critical mineral exploration tax credits, ITCs, but, at this point, just getting tax parity, getting the basic tax treatment right is important to get the industry on its level playing field. To carry on with your question around, what would be the next step? Once we've established the industry production, getting the company solid, the next step, as in answer to MP Stubbs's question around the reliance on U.S. liquefaction, would then be get the production up in Canada. Now let's look at establishing that infrastructure in Canada, the liquefaction infrastructure in Canada. From there, we can reliably meet Canada's needs, but we can start to export liquid helium to our allies. So to answer your question, the next step would be to attack measures that would incent liquefaction once we get tax parity for the producers.
And so your comments about allies leads really naturally into that second question. Not every government wants that free market. We've got a lot of geopolitical rivals who are happy to see prices low if it serves their interests by depressing investment in these critical minerals across the Western world. So how do we address that? How do we address that in a minimally impairing sense to make sure that we still have a free market that is sending price signals? Because I'll say one of my concerns is, yes, absolutely. Let's talk about price floors. Let's talk about the various tools that are available to us, purchases by governments to stockpile. But how do we make sure that we're not making an overall uneconomic decision? I want to combat their uneconomic decisions. I don't want to create our own uneconomic decisions. And maybe, Mr. Gaulin, you're a natural launching point for that one.
Well, we can't out-China China.
Yeah.
Simple. We don't have the wallets to do that. But when the United States government invests $400 million into one company for equity, for offtake, for price floors, you don't live in Adam Smith land anymore. You don't. The invisible hand is visible. And critical minerals, select of them are, the market is not transparent. The market is not efficient. And so the ability to rely, and I'm a child of free trade. I would love to have seen that continue. But But we don't live in a world where that is necessarily the global market for these types of commodities. I do think some of these measures have to be time-bound to provide us and Canada with a first-mover advantage. As I outlined in my remarks, I think that we can be the provider of choice to places like NATO, G7, and the like, because we are established, because we can get them out of the ground faster, and because we can therefore sustain an incumbent position with some of these customers. I'll give you an example. We sell 70% of our nickel to the United States. That is a good relationship and has been since before World War II. We sell less than one shipment a year to Germany. Germany is, if you think Germany is over-reliant on Russia for natural gas, wait till you see what it does for nickel in its military. 99% of its nickel comes from Russia. These are not conditions that will just be magically changed overnight entirely at free market. There will need to be some industrial intervention as we are in this period of realignment and transition.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. In your opening statement, Mr. Gaulin, you made 4 recommendations, and you talked about the defence and strategic aspect, the SAFE programme, 150 billion euros for defence projects, including critical minerals. And here in the committee, on some occasions, we've heard the fact that perhaps NATO would like to have floor prices for certain critical minerals so that perhaps mining projects could get going. But we've often heard about initiatives. I've been here since 2019. We've talked about lots of different initiatives. I haven't seen any of them seeing the light of day, so I remain cautious. But I'd like to hear more about this economic situation where we've got defence needs, national security needs, all of this converging and coming together. And are there opportunities there for the mining industry, and how could Canada act to respond to the needs of certain European partners? I'd like to hear from you on that. Well, I am more at ease to answer that question in English, if you don't mind. No problem at all there.
That's been quite exciting about the critical minerals sector is that in addition to the base types of technologies that we provide, there are 2 massive future industries to support. Clean energy, which may or may not include EVs, but certainly we're talking about renewable energy, mobile batteries, etc. At the same time, at least in our company, but in many other critical minerals, they have long gone into defense applications, both of which we see as growth industries over the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's just a matter of what is your percentage of growth. And so I think the opportunity for us is not to pick one or the other, but I absolutely produce more minerals for all applications around the world. Our historic trading relationship for our critical minerals, and we produce mostly nickel, but also copper and cobalt. Some days we're a gold miner who happens to pull out nickel out of the ground. But these have been essential for the American industry. I'll give you a perspective. We have 5 mines in the city of Sudbury, 5 nickel mines in the city of Sudbury, and we invite any and all the committee to come visit. There is 1 in the entire United States, and it does not have a refinery. It has to send that to Canada to be refined. So this has been a good bilateral relationship for a number of years. Our opportunity is not only to supply the world's biggest market, but to add new markets such as the European Union.
Thank you.
Is immense.
Thank you. We're going to
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to address you today. Helium is a critical mineral central to Canada's economic, defence, and digital ambitions. However, the sector is at risk and requires targeted support. Amending the Income Tax Act to designate helium as a mineral resource and make it eligible for standard tax measures would be the single most effective action government can take. The case for supporting Canada's emerging helium sector is strong. As Heather Exner-Perot noted in her presentation to the committee last week, worldwide demand for helium is growing given its fundamental role in a range of high-tech applications, including semiconductor and fiber optic manufacturing, quantum computing, spaceflight, nuclear energy, and MRIs. Global economic development requires secure and resilient critical mineral supply chains. This is especially true now for helium, where growing Russian helium supplies are saturating the market and driving commodity prices down, while at the same time increasing end-user security of supply concerns. Canada holds the world's fifth largest estimated helium resource. Extracted from deep, relatively unexplored reservoirs in Western Canada, using world-class Canadian drilling expertise, helium development offers significant potential. Saskatchewan's plant alone targets supplying 10% of global demand while generating thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions in annual investment. Manitoba and Alberta have significant helium opportunity as well. However, Canada's helium sector, driven by entrepreneurial small-cap Canadian companies, is struggling. Uncompetitive tax treatment as compared to what is provided other critical minerals in Canada, notably helium's exclusion from standard depreciation schedule and from the flow-through share program, is proving especially impactful in this low-price environment. Exploration and development activity is slow to a crawl. Investor confidence has fallen, and increasingly, helium companies are looking to the U.S. given preferential tax treatment and investor sentiment. Meanwhile, domestic volumes remain too small to justify liquefaction facilities, so final processing of Canadian helium occurs in the U.S., further raising security of supply concerns amid growing U.S. helium demand as well as ongoing trade tensions. Competitive depreciation is a core tool in Canada's economic toolbox to attract investment. However, helium has provided only goodwill depreciation, the weakest depreciation category available. While other critical minerals are typically depreciated against taxes over a 6-year period, helium projects are depreciated over a 40-year period. A major competitive disadvantage and clearly unfair given helium projects typically have an operating life of under 15 years. Helium is also excluded from Canada's proven flow-through share program. Flow-through share financing supports roughly 70% of Canadian mineral exploration and is specifically designed to help junior companies raise the capital needed for early-stage grassroots exploration, precisely the support the helium sector needs. Without access to flow-through shares, risk capital has shunned helium, with the result that Canadian helium companies have struggled to secure the financing needed to advance their opportunities. Consistent with the precedent set in Budget 2023 for lithium from brine, the straightforward solution is to amend the Income Tax Act to include helium as a defined mineral resource. The provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have all submitted multiple letters of support for the proposed tax measures for helium, recognizing the strategic importance of growing the sector, the modest shared investment between federal and provincial governments, and the substantial value generated for governments and its citizens. In closing, the Kananaskis G7 communique recognized that to strengthen and diversify critical mineral supplies, governments must remove barriers to investment and implement measures that reduce investor risk and attract private capital. Amending the Income Tax Act to designate helium as a mineral resource and make it eligible for standard tax measures will achieve those goals for Canada's helium sector, and in doing so, unlock private investment, stimulate jobs and economic growth, enable domestic liquefaction, increase security of supply, and position the sector as a reliable helium supplier for Canada and its allies. Thank you. We look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. And now, Mr. Gratton, you have 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about critical minerals. I also want to begin by recognizing that we are gathered today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and to acknowledge the hundreds of Indigenous nations across Canada on whose traditional lands our industry operates and with whom we have strong partnerships. Before getting into specifics on critical minerals, it's important to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in as an industry and country since the focus on opportunities related to critical minerals emerged just a few years ago. Around that time, during the first Trump administration in January 2020, the Canada-US Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals was launched with the goal of, quote, advancing both countries' common interest in strengthening North American critical mineral production needed for defense, aerospace, clean energy, communications, and other key industries. Today, the focus on Canada-US collaboration on critical minerals has largely been displaced by the unprecedented attack on the rules-based order related to trade and to our North American partnership. U.S. tariffs have increased downward pressure on already declining investment, threatening key Canadian sectors. So while we are in a very different place in terms of our economic position, particularly in regard to our relationship with the United States, advancing Canadian critical and all mineral production is now even more of an imperative than it is an opportunity, essential to boosting economic resilience and diversifying Canada's trade. Adding to this urgency is the fact that Chinese influence over the global critical minerals market continues to deepen. Beyond earlier restrictions on gallium and germanium, China now imposes licensing requirements or selective bans on graphite products for battery anodes, antimony, tungsten, tellurium, bismuth, indium, and several rare earth elements. China also maintains roughly 85 to 90% of the world's rare earth refining and separation capacity and dominates the production of rare earth magnets and other downstream components. It also has a large influence on commonly used metals like nickel and cobalt through international investments in Indonesia, the DRC, Zambia, and elsewhere. These actions highlight the strategic risk posed by China's control of downstream processing. For Canada and its allies, this concentration underscores the urgent need to expand mining production and build and diversify refining, recycling, and magnet manufacturing capacity outside China. The good news is that Canada's mining industry is already diversified in terms of trade and global outlook, and ideally positioned to play a central role in recalibrating our economy and providing an anchor for diversified trade relationships to deliver long-term economic resilience and prosperity to our country. I want to underscore here, too, as well, is that while we are facing unprecedented actions by the United States in terms of tariffs on the Canadian economy, the minerals and metals sector has been largely untouched by these. Why? Because the United States, notwithstanding their desire to shore up the manufacturing sector, needs our metals in order to do so. We're also in a situation where we have strong and expected and rising demand for many mineral and metal products, and that demand is expected to increase in the decades to come. We're also at a moment where there is unprecedentedly high public support for mining. In our most recent survey, we saw the largest percentage of Canadians being supportive of the mining sector than we have seen in the last 15 years of surveying Canadians, at 82% of public support. I also saw a recent survey that put mining at the top of a long list of sectors that gave Canadians confidence about the future. The committee motion that launched, so I raise all this because I honestly believe, and I said so before the Vancouver Board of Trade last week when I addressed them, that I think this is mining's moment. I think there is a coalescence of all sorts of factors that really lend themselves to a strong focus on building and growing our mining sector at this point in time. The committee motion that launched the study also rightly referenced Indigenous rights. Central to the ability of our sector to deliver for Canada, and more important than ever, will be the need to maintain responsible mineral production and prioritization of relationships with Indigenous communities. This approach is fundamental to moving forward and cannot and will not be compromised, because we know that any attempt to do so, including rushing or circumventing the constitutional duty to consult, will only set us back. So to deliver for Canada, we need to retool and address declines in key areas and ensure that aspirations related to the mining industry and committed to in the recent election campaign are effectively implemented and delivered at the speed of business. Otherwise, investment and opportunity will go elsewhere. So what do we need to do?
Just going to ask you to finish up,
Yeah.
if you would, Mr. There'll be lots of opportunity with questions.
Sure. There's a few key issues that we want to share with you. First, addressing the clean manufacturing investment tax credit, the copper threshold issue, which many of you may be familiar with because we've been talking about it for 2 years. The ITC needs to be amended because our deposits are polymetallic, and setting a threshold at 90% critical mineral content is too high, and it won't stimulate new investment. You also need to expand the ITC to include other minerals and metals. The previous government focused only on battery metals. We also need to expand it to defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greton. And we're going to go on to Monsieur Gaulin. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Bon après-midi.
Good afternoon.
Je suis le vice-président des affaires coopératives for
I am Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Vale Base Metals.
a world in transition. At Valley Base Metals, we are stewards of nickel, copper, and cobalt, reserves around the world based in Canada, but in Brazil and Indonesia. Our refineries here in Canada, as well as in the UK and Japan, serve our allies in Asia, in Europe, and yes, even America. Our combination of geology and geography, grounded and centered here in Canada, allows us to deliver a reliable and responsible supply of minerals through today's global volatility to produce the products of the future. Artificial intelligence and data centers, robotics and defense systems, energy and telecommunications infrastructure. Critical minerals are foundational to Canada's economic resilience, our national security, and our global competitiveness. And you can count on us to keep Canada secure, sovereign, and sustainable. In Canada, we employ more than 7,000 Canadians to explore, mine, and refine critical minerals in Manitoba, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador. We operate the only fully integrated mining complex in all of North America. Our mineral abundance and our rich heritage in developing them responsibly makes Vale Base Metals a Canadian champion, a global connector in a fractured world. We are Canadian by choice. Demand for critical minerals is growing exponentially in a world where price and supply volatility are now the norm. The International Energy Agency reports that demand for key minerals continues to surge. Supply for refined materials highly concentrated in China, which is suppressing prices for minerals such as lithium, graphite, and nickel. Projects face regulatory uncertainty. Trade agreements are under attack, and the threat of export restrictions is only on the rise. In short, critical minerals are being weaponized. And in response, Canada can be a secure global supplier. Canada's presidency of the G7 gives it a unique opportunity to expand markets such as Germany, as well as other EU countries, who today are reliant on minerals that originate in Russia and are refined in China. But this is not simply a matter of finding a match between Canadian supply and global demand. I have been to London, Washington, Dubai, Brussels, Berlin to advocate for more Canadian access to those markets. But supply chains abroad are not going to change easily or quickly without change here at home. Building new supply relationships takes time, coordination, and the sharpening of our competitiveness to make Canadian minerals more attractive to foreign markets. Therefore, I propose 4 recommendations for the committee's consideration. Number 1, position Canada as a supplier of choice for NATO. Canada should aggressively pursue NATO defense and adjacent infrastructure spending in exchange for preferential, long-term, secure and reliable access to critical minerals at a premium. Canada has applied to join the Security Action for Europe, the SAFE program, which is basically the EU's defense procurement club. If accepted, Canada will join the UK as the only non-EU members in the club and the club's leading critical minerals producer. Canada could leverage such a membership by integrating Canadian minerals into SAFE's procurement. This would give Canada a competitive advantage to provide the EU with critical minerals, both for defense-related procurements and strategic economic infrastructure such as LNG, pipelines, data centers, and AI. Number 2, increase the availability of capital. Canada should expand the eligibility criteria of the investment tax credits to make eligible mine development expenses to spur the investments that increase our mineral output fast. Canada should also work with G7 credit institutions, such as the UK Export Finance, to encourage the financing and use of Canadian critical minerals in our allies' supply chains. And Canadian pension funds should be encouraged to invest more into Canadian natural resources, particularly critical minerals. Number 3, elevate global standards. Canada should lead through the G7 Critical Minerals Production Alliance the implementation and enforcement of traceability standards. Canada should also get our allies to revisit their rules of origin to reflect the real risks of the minerals in their supply chains. 4, secure a global workforce. Now, finally, Canada should compete for top global mining talent, for we are more likely to run out of miners than we are to run out of minerals. Now, naturally, we should develop a domestic workforce as best we can. But as a country, we should also compete to recruit and retain the best in the world, to turn the world's best miners into Canadians by choice. Priority review and recognition should be made for work visas and immigration applications within the critical minerals industry to support Canada rapidly becoming a more secure, sovereign, and sustainable global supplier of choice. Becoming more competitive will speed our access to market. That is essential for Canada's prosperity, resilience, and national security. Critical minerals are not just valuable rocks. They are the bedrock of Canada's industrial, trade, and defense strategies, now and for a generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaulin. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And thank you all for your presentations, for your recommendations, which I know the committee will consider carefully.